A major business newspaper, read by investors, CEOs, and policymakers, just quoted a K-pop star. Not a stock tip, not a market forecast, not a quote from a billionaire or a Nobel laureate. A quote from BTS member Jimin. And when you actually read what he said, you'll understand exactly why one of the biggest financial publications on the planet decided his words deserved a spot next to the kind of wisdom usually reserved for philosophers, CEOs, and world leaders. Stick around, because by the end of this video you're going to understand not just what he said, but why it's hitting so many people so hard right now, and why this moment says something much bigger about who Jimin has become. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because we cover moments like this before almost anyone else does, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming later in this video. Let's set the scene first, because context is everything here. The Economic Times is not a fan site. It's not a pop culture blog. It's one of the largest and most respected business and financial newspapers in the world, read daily by people making decisions worth billions of dollars. Their quote of the day feature is a small but influential corner of the publication, a space typically reserved for lines from figures like Steve Jobs, Albert Einstein, the Dalai Lama, or historic business leaders. It's the kind of feature designed to give busy, high-powered readers a moment of reflection before they dive into earnings reports and market analysis. It is, quite literally, curated for people who don't have time for fluff. So when a name like Jimin shows up in that space, it's not an accident, and it's not just a nod to his massive global fan base. It's a signal that his words are being treated as something worth pausing for, even by people who may never have listened to a BTS song in their life. Here's exactly what appeared under the heading Quote of the Day by BTS star Jimin. The text read, "Holding on to pain, resentment, and disappointment can quietly weigh us down. BTS star Jimin believes true happiness begins when we learn to let go." His thoughtful words encourage us to release emotional baggage so our hearts can make room for peace, freedom, and personal growth. Read that again, slowly. There's no forced positivity in there. There's no shallow, generic advice. It's a quiet, mature observation about how pain doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just sits there, invisible, weighing us down a little more every single day until we don't even notice how heavy we've become. And the fix he's pointing to isn't about pretending the pain never happened. It's about learning to release it, so there's room again for peace, for freedom, for growth. That's not idle talk. That's the kind of thing you'd expect from a therapist, a monk, or someone who has actually lived through real darkness and come out the other side with something to say about it. And that's exactly what makes this moment so powerful, because if you know Jimin's story, even a little bit, you know this isn't just a nice quote plucked out of thin air. This is a man who has been publicly honest about carrying real weight for years. He's spoken before about periods of deep struggle, about moments where the pressure of fame, the intensity of performing at the highest level in the world, and the isolation that can come with global stardom pushed him into genuinely dark places. He didn't hide that. He didn't put on a mask and pretend everything was fine for the cameras. He talked about it, publicly, knowing millions of people were listening. And that kind of honesty is rare in any industry, let alone one as relentlessly image-focused as K-pop. So when a quote like this gets attributed to him, framed around the idea of releasing pain to make room for peace, it's worth noting that, at least based on what he's shared publicly, it doesn't read like a random marketing angle. It reads like something that could plausibly come from someone who has actually lived through real weight, though of course, none of us can say for certain what was going through his mind when these words were compiled. Before we go further, I want you to do something for me. If this is resonating with you even a little bit, drop a comment right now and tell me which part of that quote hit you the hardest. Was it the holding on to pain part? Was it the idea that happiness begins when we let go? I read every single comment on these videos, and I genuinely want to know what part of Jimin's message is landing with you today, wherever you're watching this from. Now let's talk about why this particular message, at this particular moment, matters so much. Because this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is landing right in the middle of one of the biggest stretches of Jimin's career, during BTS's massive ARIRANG World Tour, a tour that has taken him and the rest of the group across entire continents, filling stadium after stadium, night after night, in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans. We're talking sold-out nights at some of the largest venues in Europe and North America, back to back to back, with barely any time to breathe in between. If you've been following our channel, you already know the scale of what this tour has looked like. Munich, Paris, London, Madrid, Brussels, and now, an extended North American leg that has already stopped at MetLife Stadium, Gillette Stadium, and M&T Bank Stadium in Baltimore, with more massive shows still ahead. That is an absolutely brutal schedule by any human standard, let alone for someone who has to be vocally, physically, and emotionally on 4-2, sometimes 3 hours a night, in front of the biggest crowds of his life. And yet, in the middle of all of that intensity, this is the message that's surfacing. Not exhaustion, not complaints, a quiet, grounded reflection on letting go of pain so there's room for peace. Think about what that actually says about where Jimin is, mentally and emotionally, right now, at the specific point in his life and career. This isn't a 20-year-old idol who hasn't lived enough to have anything real to say. This is someone who has been in the industry since 2013, who has been through the absolute highest highs, sold-out world tours, historic chart records, global brand partnerships, and also some of the lowest lows that come with a life lived almost entirely in public view. And what comes out of that combination, apparently, is not bitterness. It's not cynicism. It's this, a message about release, about choosing peace over resentment, about making space for growth instead of staying stuck. If you're finding value in this breakdown, do me a favor and hit that like button before we go any further. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who need to hear this message, and it tells me you want more deep dive content like this, not just clips and headlines. Let's dig a little deeper into what this quote actually means, because I don't want to just read it to you, I want to actually unpack it, because there's more nuance here than you might catch on first read. The first part talks about holding on to pain, resentment, and disappointment quietly weighing us down. That word, quietly, is doing a lot of work. It's not describing a dramatic collapse. It's describing the slow, almost invisible way that unresolved pain accumulates in a person over time. You don't notice it happening day to day. You just wake up one morning and realize you're carrying something heavy, and you can't quite remember when it got so heavy in the first place. That's an incredibly mature psychological observation, and it's the kind of thing that usually only comes from someone who has actually lived through that exact experience and had to consciously work their way out of it. Then the quote pivots to the idea that true happiness begins when we learn to let go. Not when circumstances change. Not when other people apologize. Not when the pain magically disappears on its own. Happiness begins with an internal choice, the choice to release what we're holding on to. That's a subtle but massive difference from how most people think about happiness. Most of us wait for external things to change before we let ourselves feel okay. We wait for the apology, the resolution, the closure. But what's being suggested here is that waiting is exactly the trap. The freedom comes from releasing the grip yourself, regardless of whether the outside world ever gives you the resolution you were hoping for. And the final piece of the quote ties it all together, describing how releasing emotional baggage makes room in our hearts for peace, freedom, and personal growth. Notice that it doesn't say releasing pain magically fixes everything. It says it makes room. It creates space. That's such an honest, realistic way to describe healing, because healing was never about erasing what happened to you. It's about making enough space inside yourself that the pain isn't the only thing living there anymore. That peace, freedom, and growth can finally have some room to exist alongside everything you've already been through. Now, if you've been part of this community for a while, you know we always keep things accurate here. So let's be clear about the framing. This is presented by the Economic Times as their curated quote of the day, attributed to Jimin and built around a message associated with him. It's the publication's own framing of his outlook, not necessarily a verbatim excerpt lifted directly from a single interview transcript. But that context doesn't make the moment any less significant. If anything, it makes it more interesting, because it means an entire editorial team at one of the world's most influential business newspapers looked at the body of what Jimin represents, what he's said publicly over the years, how he's carried himself through his very public struggles and his very public growth, and decided that his outlook on letting go of pain was worth putting in front of their readers as something genuinely valuable. That's not something that happens to just anyone. That's a reflection of real, accumulated credibility. And that's really the bigger story here, isn't it? Because think about how unusual this actually is. K-pop, as an industry, often gets reduced in Western media to spectacle. Choreography, outfits, chart numbers, fandom statistics. Rarely does it get treated as a source of genuine wisdom, the kind of thing you'd expect to see quoted alongside historical thinkers and business icons. But here we are. A business newspaper, with zero obligation to cover K-pop at all, chose to elevate Jimin's words into that exact space. That tells you something about how far his personal brand, his public reputation, and honestly his personal growth have traveled beyond the borders of the music industry itself. He's no longer just being covered as a member of BTS. He's being treated, in this specific moment, as a voice worth listening to on the subject of human emotional well-being. That's an entirely different category of influence. If you're new to this channel, and you're just now discovering how deep Jimin's story actually goes, beyond the choreography and the charts, comment down below where you're watching from, and how long you've been following his journey. I love seeing just how global and how layered this community really is, and honestly, some of the stories in the comments are just as powerful as the ones we cover in these videos. Let's also talk about the timing of all of this within the bigger picture of what's happening around BTS and Jimin this year. This entire era, built around the ARIRANG album, has been defined by a group and a member who are clearly not just performing for the sake of performing anymore. This is a group that came back from years of individual paths, individual growth, individual struggles, and reassembled with something to say. The album itself, the tour, the interviews along the way, all of it has carried this undertone of reflection, of maturity, of people who have lived enough life to have real perspective now. And Jimin, specifically, has been at the center of so many of these reflective, emotionally resonant moments throughout this era. Whether it was his performance moments that clearly carried real emotional weight, his interactions with fans that showed genuine vulnerability, or interviews where he's talked candidly about what this journey has actually cost him and given him an equal measure, there's been a consistent thread running through this entire period. And this quote, showing up in a business newspaper's daily wisdom feature, feels like the natural culmination of that thread finally being noticed by an audience far outside the usual K-pop coverage. Here's something worth sitting with for a second. Most artists, even massively successful ones, never get quoted this way. They get quoted about their music, their achievements, their next project. They rarely get quoted as sources of life advice by outlets that have absolutely nothing to gain from covering them, outlets whose entire audience is built around finance and business, not entertainment. Now, we can't know exactly what went through that editorial team's mind when they chose this quote for that specific day. Nobody outside that newsroom really can. But what we can say for certain is that his words made the cut in a space typically reserved for figures whose ideas are considered worth a reader's time. And that alone is worth paying attention to because the audience of a major business newspaper is full of people under enormous pressure. Executives making high-stakes decisions, investors managing constant uncertainty, professionals grinding through demanding careers. Whatever the reasoning behind it, a message from a K-pop idol about letting go of pain ended up in front of that exact audience on that exact day. That's not a small thing. That's a genuinely interesting crossover moment. Before we wrap this up, I want to bring this back to something bigger than just this one quote, because I think that's what really matters here. We talk a lot on this channel about Jimin's growth, about the distance between the version of him from years ago and the version standing on stage today, night after night, across an entire world tour, still finding the energy and the heart to show up fully for every single crowd. And what this moment shows us is that his growth isn't just visible in his performances, or his physical stamina, or his stage presence. It's visible in the way he talks about his own inner life now. It's visible in the fact that a message associated with him, about releasing pain to make room for peace, is resonating widely enough to end up quoted in a completely unrelated industry's publication. That's the kind of impact that goes beyond music charts and streaming numbers. That's cultural impact. That's the kind of influence that outlasts a single era, a single album cycle, a single tour. So here's what I want you to take away from this video. Whatever you're currently holding on to, whatever pain, resentment, or disappointment has been quietly sitting with you, maybe this is your reminder that letting go isn't weakness. It's not giving up. It's making room. Making room for peace you deserve. Making room for freedom you've been putting off. Making room for growth that's been waiting for you to finally set something down. If a message like that can travel from a K-pop stage all the way into the pages of one of the world's biggest business newspapers, maybe it's worth letting it travel into your own life today too. If this video gave you something to think about, make sure you like it, drop a comment telling me your thoughts, and subscribe if you haven't already, because we're covering every single moment of this tour and everything happening around it, and you do not want to miss what's coming next. Hit that notification bell too, because there is so much more from this tour and this era still ahead, and I promise you, some of it is going to hit just as hard as this did. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.